Good morning. You are listening to the Changemakers radio show here on WVCR 88.3 The Saint, where we profile changemakers in our local community, across the country, and around the world. I'm your host, Sasha, joined with my lovely co-host, Kaylin. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Things in the office are good. Just coasting through.
Nice. Same. It's just been another busy week. I helped a local, I obviously am a Bonner service leader at Unity House, and had the privilege this week of moving one of our domestic violence survivors into a brand new apartment, which was pretty cool. It was like the first time she's ever lived by herself. So that was a huge move for her. So we had a lot of fun. We went to, the store and got a bunch of things to kind of set her up with. So she's excited. It's a beautiful place. And,
I'm sure she loved sharing that experience with you.
It was really cool. I was like, it's nice to see, like, when your job comes full circle like that. So it was a very rewarding experience overall.
It's great. So who's our guest today, Kaylin?
Our guest today is Andrew McKenna. He is my uncle, and also he's a former federal prosecutor turned, I suppose, federal prisoner would be the appropriate word. And he recently wrote his memoir called Sheer Madness, which I guess it isn't recent anymore. It's been around a little while now. But he is here to talk to us kind of about his memoir, his experience, throughout his whole life, and all the public speaking that he has going on in our local community at bookstores. He's come to Siena. He's been at St. Rose. He, definitely gets around as far as,
You're all over, man.
Yeah, he's making some big progress. So welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning.
So,
Morning.
Your memoir, how did you get started with that?
Well,
tell us about yourself.
Okay. What happened was I was working at a law firm in Albany, and I was taking prescription painkillers for a back injury, but also because I've always sort of have an addictive personality, so I was taking them whether I needed them or not. Going through a difficult divorce and custody battle, I continued to take them, and when I couldn't get a doctor to prescribe them anymore, I turned to the street and ultimately to heroin. Lost my job at the firm. Things were spinning out of control. I lost repeated losses in family court, and just became incredibly depressed and sad, angry. And then things continued to kind of spiral out of control for me. The addiction was kind of raging. And instead of going to family court one day, I drove north to Lake George and robbed a bank.
Casual.
Obviously, a lot of things I'm not proud of, but so fast forward, you asked about the book. Fast forward, a therapist told me, you got to get some of these thoughts down on paper. So she suggested journaling. And once I started journaling, I realized that I kind of have a knack for telling a story. And some of the stuff became very, very funny. Some of it was kind of tragic. Paul Grondel from the Times-Union referred to it as a tragicomic masterpiece, which was a proud moment of my life because he's a great writer, an author, journalist. So that gave me more incentive to continue to fine-tune things. A good friend, Chad Curran, helped me to publish it on CreateSpace, which is an Amazon platform. And the book's available on Amazon.com. CreateSpace is one of the most amazing companies I've ever worked with. If you have a question about your book or the royalties or whatever's going on, you click a button online, and they'll call you within 2 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
That's great customer service.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and the people there know exactly where to steer you. So that was a really positive experience. Ultimately, I robbed more banks and was caught finally. And, we told the sentencing judge in federal court that I robbed banks to get money for heroin, when the reality was I didn't need that much money to get whatever I needed for that day in particular.
Sure.
It was more out of anger and despair and sadness over the loss and, of my children. Ultimately, I was responsible. This wasn't the family court's problem. It wasn't the boy's mother's problem. It was my problem solely.
Sure.
So it was a really cathartic process writing it. And I recommend it to, I talked to colleges and high schools and professional organizations. I recommend the exercise of journaling to everybody because I just think it's really effective in getting your thoughts out.
Wow. That you've got,
Quite a story.
definitely you just gave us a whole bunch of questions to ask from there. So when did sort of all of this start? Like when did you rob your first bank? This was, this wasn't like the 80s or 90s. This was relatively recently.
Right. It was in 2005, November. It was shortly. No, I guess the first one was in September, October timeframe, and it came about. I wasn't in my right state of mind. Okay, I was, clinically depressed, severely depressed,
Sure.
and couldn't see my way out of the depression. And then you add, powerful opiates to that, and the withdrawal symptoms coming in and out of withdrawal. It just became overwhelming, and I think subconsciously I somehow struck out and committed these crimes. Now, it's important to note this book is not about bank robberies.
Sure.
There's one part in the opening chapter, and that's the day that I got caught. So I take the reader through that period, but then I go back to not to the beginning of my life, but back far enough to be able to illustrate, how I progressed all through the years. Right, addictive personality in high school, smoking pot, drinking, beer and liquor. Pulling that out, making it through college, and then going to law school,
Right.
then to the Marines, then to the U.S. Justice Department in Washington. And I guess the lesson in there, and this is what I talk about when I speak to different groups, is that this can happen to anyone, right? It doesn't, addiction or alcohol issues, they don't read resumes. And I'm quoting, so I forget who said that. It could have been.
I remember reading it in your book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and it's, it doesn't. And my message to everybody, including colleges and different groups that I talked about, is that you got to keep your eyes wide open. You got to be self-aware. You have to recognize when you're going through a period of depression or sadness, and reach out and get some help, because the help is there, especially like in a college environment.
Absolutely.
There's so many different avenues open to you, and people want to help, and they're in place to do that. I wish I had done more of that, because clearly, even a few years ago when this all happened, the help was there. I just couldn't see my way to ask for it.
Right. Wow. So this is a really deep story, and there are some definite dark spots throughout the book. But the one thing I noticed when reading it is that I was laughing so hard at different points that I was in tears on the plane laughing. So people, of course, thought I was hysterical or crazy. And because, and also the same page, I could be in tears for a completely different reason, which was pretty remarkable because I'm generally not very, emotionally influenced that much by a book. But, it was hysterical and depressing all at the same time. How do you manage to keep a sense of humor about, some of the tragedies?
Right. Well, I've said this before in interviews. I'm Irish, and the Irish have a unique ability to turn a tragic situation into a funny situation. And, but the ups and downs actually, I didn't set out to do this intentionally. I think it just happened. But for the book to kind of be a roller coaster of emotions, that was kind of representative of what I was actually going through. So even during the darkest pits of despair, there were still these little bright moments where I'd find the absurd, funny, and that's my personality, anyways.
It's true.
Yeah, I always find the most absurd things to be the funniest things.
Right. Wow. Okay. That is a really good way to, kind of balance some of the darkness there.
Well, the feedback's been really positive, and like Alan Shartok, when I did the interview with him, he said it was the funniest book he's read since House of God, which is a book about the medical profession.
Yeah.
And there are funny moments, and I'm just glad I was able to get those through, because if it was just a book about heroin addiction, depression, and crime,
you couldn't get past the first chapter.
No, I mean people would be committing suicide if they read it. So let's keep them laughing.
Right. Yeah, it is really funny. I definitely recommend it. So for our listeners that have been, engaged in your story and are like, wow, this guy's insane, but also this book sounds great, where can they get the book?
Okay, you can get it on Amazon.com. It's Sheer Madness, from federal prosecutor to federal prisoner. And you can get it on BarnesandNoble.com. And it's also in independent bookstores. It's in the Book House in Stuyvesant Plaza in Albany. A couple others, Open Door Bookstore in Schenectady. And then they carry it in Lake Placid at the Bookstore Plus on the main street there. These are all great bookstores. They're not these Goliaths like Barnes and Noble. And, it has a community feel to it.
Sounds like a local presence.
Love that.
Yeah. And, Saturday, soon it's going to be the Independent Bookstore Day, celebrated across the United States. And so I definitely encourage listeners to support.
I think nationally, Independent Bookstore Day is May 2nd. Is that right?
That's right. It's May 2nd.
Very cool. So if you are interested in supporting your local bookstore, which we, absolutely love here on the show, supporting your local businesses, and you are intrigued by Andrew McKenna's story here, be sure to head over to any of the local bookstores just mentioned to pick up your copy of Sheer Madness. But I also understand that you do a lot of book signings, which we're going to get to after this short public service announcement. But check out our Facebook page for more information about the book. And stay tuned in the next segment so we can continue our conversation with Andrew here on WVCR 88.3 The Saint.
Shining on my heart, so you this love I have inside is everything.
Welcome back to Changemakers on WVCR 88.3 The Saint, where we profile changemakers in our local community across the country and around the world. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Sasha, once again.
Hello.
And today on the show, we have our guest, Andrew McKenna, author of Sheer Madness, which is also his memoir, even though if you read it, you would not believe this actually happened to a real person. He was a former federal prosecutor, turned to federal prisoner, and he has quite the story to share. But before we get started with talking with Andrew again in this segment, we're going to read you guys a little bit from the book. It's definitely an interesting read.
Okay. Quote, "It will change you. You will never be the same." At just 16 years of age, when a grizzled Californian drug dealer spoke those words of warning, there was no way Andrew McKenna could know that a few decades later, while embroiled in a losing custody battle, heroin would become the most seductive and destructive force in his life. Raised in Schenectady, New York, Andrew's upbringing sounds familiar. Little League baseball, scraps with the boys from the neighborhood, parties, road trips. But below the surface, Andrew always felt different, detached somehow, and constantly wondering how he fit in the bigger picture. Always just steps from the mire of an existential crisis. Then, at the urging of one of his older brothers, he joins the military. Next, law school, followed by training with the Marines. And before he knows it, what hits him? This once aimless boy from modest roots is rapidly rising through the ranks as an attorney for the U.S. Justice Department. But years of untreated emotional distress, combined with physical toil of the military, eventually led him down a dark path, one riddled with prescription medication, alcohol, divorce, the loss of contact with his sons, and ultimately, crime. Sheer Madness is a reflection and a reminder. A reflection on Andrew's multifaceted life, one of great ambition and success, but also great tragedy, and a reminder that regardless of one's personal background, life can be a slippery slope. And while the ride down can be exhilarating, it's the climb back up that truly defines us. Awesome stuff.
That is great.
Great
so
stuff.
that is from Andrew McKenna's book, Sheer Madness. And Sasha, you should consider being a professional reader if you could do that. Because
Yeah, that was great. You had a great,
Thank you.
great voice, great
Might be the
modulation.
side hustle.
That was fabulous. So,
Now, I got to point out, that's from the introduction to the book, written by Chris Morris, who is my copy editor. And he works and lives up in the Adirondacks. He's an amazing writer, and we kind of worked on that piece together. But I think that really does capture, pretty much what happened.
absolutely. So, again, that book, that excerpt you heard from Sheer Madness is written by Andrew McKenna, and it's located or available for purchase in several local bookstores, including Stuyvesant Plaza. What is the bookstore called?
And it's called the Book House.
The Book House in
Yeah.
Stuyvesant Plaza. There's, I can't
We have
remember.
the Open
other
Door in
ones.
Schenectady, Bookstore Plus in Lake Placid, and there's a few others in the area.
Perfect.
And I'm going to continue to add those to my Facebook page, which is Sheer Madness. It's 2 E's, not an E and an A in sheer. Otherwise, you're going to get like haircut in places.
Here.
So,
Good
but,
distinction.
yeah. So I just add the content to that, and if people want to follow it, if they're interested, then that's really good and helpful too.
Great.
So, before the break, we talked a lot about, the book itself and kind of getting started with that and kind of your roller coaster of a life. But we wanted to talk a lot about the public speaking engagements that we think make you a change maker in our area. So, if someone wanted to get in touch with you about booking you for a speaking engagement, like in a classroom or something like that, how would they go about doing that?
Couple different ways. They can contact me through the Facebook page, Sheer Madness, or they can email me directly at andrewmckenna0113@yahoo.com. And then shortly, we're about to launch the webpage, which will be andrewjamesmckenna.com. So there's a couple different ways. I was just recently out west in Washington State speaking to a group of professionals. And, all the different groups I speak to, there's slightly different bent, but the general message is the same. And I spoke a little bit about it before the break. It's self-awareness, asking for help. The stigma of people going through either depression or drug and alcohol abuse, that stigma is lifting. And it's lifted since I was, in college or in high school. It's more accepted as a reality in many people's lives. So, speak up or get the help that you need. Reach out because the help is there. And the other part is no matter how dark of a point you might be going through in life, whether it's loss of a loved one or a divorce, whatever it could be, loss of a job, that there's a light at the end of that you're going to get through it one way or another. You're going to get through it. And it's focusing on achieving small positive steps every day, even if you don't feel like it. Do something positive every day, and you'll see that light start to get a little bit bigger every day. And then eventually you're going to come out of what you're going through, and you will survive it.
Very cool.
That's excellent.
And before the break, you talked a little bit about kind of your tactics to sort of your therapist that told you that writing things down is a really effective way to sort of, work through what you're going through using words. Are there other ways that you use as kind of an outlet to cope with emotions and things like that?
There are. One thing I do, and I need to do a lot more of it, is exercise. And it doesn't necessarily mean going to the gym. For me, it could be a nice 20 or 30 minute power walk, fast walk. I don't listen to music when I do it. I just want to hear the sounds around me and the nature and just deal with that. And so exercise is a huge thing. Some kind of spiritual program, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a belief in God, but there's something bigger out there. I think we can all agree on that. There's some larger energy force out there that if you can kind of tap into a little bit, that's going to be helpful too. For me, because generally, my personality is that of a risk taker. And, I used to be a lot worse than I am now. I mean, I'm 46, so the party's over.
Oh gosh, don't say that.
Well, I mean, in terms of living life on the edge, it's time to settle down, and in 5 years in federal prison will kind of settle you down.
I would hope
they make the point. So, but I have to be self-aware, as I said earlier, and I have to look at my behaviors, and I think we all have to do this, and look at. Am I getting out of my normal routine? Am I doing things that are inconsistent with my value system? And that's another piece, identifying your value system. And watching myself, if I start to stray away from my value system too much, then I need to pull it back.
Right.
And I used to have this crazy boss in the Marines, and she used to say to me, well, if what you're doing, and she didn't direct this at me, but this was sort of her philosophy. If what you're doing couldn't be on the front page of the paper, then should you be doing it? So it's we don't have to lead like sullen, boring lives. I still kind of,
fun.
I'm out there a bit, yeah. But particularly if you're going through a difficult time, I think you have to watch your behaviors.
Sure. Wow.
Now, I'm sorry to cut you off, Kate.
You're totally good.
Your books in many local bookstores. I'm sure you have a lot of speaking engagement under your belt. Would you consider yourself a writer now?
That's a great question. I think so, in a sense. In a couple weeks, I have an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and yeah, I'm excited about that. And we have some other national press possibilities coming up. And I think that, and I'm working on a second memoir. So if it were up to me, that's what I would do full time. I would just write. It's a tough gig, and it's tough to get the bills paid. But if you can get to that tipping point, then you can be comfortable enough to do what you love. In terms of practicing law, in a couple of years, I can apply to get my law license back. I intend to do that, but I'd rather write. If I could practice law half the time and write half the time, then that for me would be a perfect professional world.
An artistic attorney.
I love it. And he was always from the start. So right now you're doing paralegal work. Is that correct in your, bill paying time?
I am. I'm doing legal research and writing for different attorneys in New York, and it's good because the writing piece of the research and the writing, a lot of people think that, legal writing has to be dry and boring. But the fact of the matter is that you're trying to persuade somebody. You're advocating for a position. You're trying to persuade the judge or the other parties of that position. And so it does become creative writing in a way. Every word that you choose is important. And so that's still fun for me. And the research has always been fun for me, legal research. So
very cool. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on our show. We're almost out of time, if you can believe it. We've got about 2 minutes left. I can't either. But this has been a really engaging interview, and I've been really excited to finally have you on the show and to kind of talk about sheer madness and things like that. And I think the most important takeaway that I've gotten from this is that, addiction and a hard time can really face anybody because your parents were both, teachers, and your father was a professor here. So, you came from a pretty standard background and family and things like that, and you still do. But, remaining true to yourself and working through it and, being the best you that you can be, it seems to be the most important thing of all.
Thanks. And I'll just my final comment is about a change maker. You could be like a big change maker, like, Bill and Melinda Gates, or you could be a micro change maker, and that could be just be being polite to somebody, holding the door for somebody, and oftentimes that causes a chain reaction, the butterfly effect, and it makes change.
Wow, you just took my last and our signature question right out of my mouth. So you can celebrate that victory for yourself because you just led the interview for you. Great. Well, like I said, it's been a pleasure having you on our show.
Pleasure to be here.
Very nice
Absolutely
having
loved
you.
it. For more information on Andrew McKenna and his memoir, Sheer Madness, check out his Facebook page, Sheer Madness by Andrew McKenna. That's Sheer with 2 E's, not to be confused with an E and an A. And if you have interest in picking up the book, check out your local bookstore, visit Amazon.com, or check out our Facebook page where we will link more information about Andrew McKenna, Sheer Madness, and where you can find that book. Like I said, or as always, join us every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. here on WVCR 88.3 The Saint Changemakers.
The world